Please stand as you are able for the reading of the gospel. The gospel today is from the Gospel of Mark, the 9th chapter. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But the disciples were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another over who was the greatest. Jesus sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. Well, good morning, everyone. When I was pregnant with Luke a few years ago, and we were getting close to his due date, it would not be a shocker to say that I had a rather large stomach and could not wait for that day to finally come. On one Sunday close to his due date, I was greeting families and chatting, and a small 4-year-old comes up and says, "You have a big belly." To which point his father was thoroughly embarrassed, apologized, and scolded him, saying, "You can't say that." But by that point, he was definitely correct in his observation. So I kindly knelt down and said, "Yes, I do have a big belly. There's a baby in there." And I was expecting this face of excited and surprised, but instead his face turned to this state of horror. "Did you eat it?" To which point we all had to stifle back the giggles as we tried to explain something closer to the truth. And I love this memory because it shows off the best of childlike wonder and curiosity. Kids really do say the darndest things, and they're very unapologetic as they try to make sense of the world around them. It may come as no surprise, but research shows that kids around the age of 4, on average, will ask roughly 200 questions a day. A day. They're learning and experiencing the world around them. They want to take in everything, and they don't allow things like fear, shame, political correctness to get in the way. They want things to make sense, to learn those boundaries, probably so they can push them a little bit. And if you look at where and when the questioning begins to fade, it's as they progress through grade school. As reading and writing increases, the ability to ask questions decrease significantly. Because in school, we're rewarded for having the answers, not for asking the good questions. By middle school, kids have basically stopped asking questions altogether so that they can focus on the answers, the concrete facts, and what's going to help them find greatness in their future. Plus, experiences and interactions with our peers can be really tough teachers. Our questions get harder to ask when we feel as though we will be judged by others, or when we're told that we aren't allowed to ask certain ones, or when the questions get too deep or too hard to find answers for. At a certain point, it becomes much easier to stay silent than to take the risk. And in the silence, other things creep in, like our perceptions of how to behave or what to wear or even what to believe. In the silence, there's the danger of conforming to what we believe everyone else is doing, the keeping up with the Joneses, rather than holding true to our integrity and our beliefs. In the silence, it's so much easier to turn towards other things like envy, greed, insecurity, and narcissism than to engage in community with each other. But at our core, we're made for community. We're made to be with each other, and we have this burning desire within us to seek greatness by being valued and recognized by others. And that desire is so great that even if we feel like we can't achieve it, we at least want to be associated with it. This is why we buy certain brands or products or join institutions, so that we can associate with other things and people that we deem as great. And this quest is embedded in our humanity, no matter how we seek it. Even in our gospel reading for today, we find the disciples facing a similar issue. As they're traveling the countryside with their teacher Jesus, he finds a moment to tell them the hard truth of what is to come. That he is going to be betrayed, possibly by one of them. That he will be killed. That his journey and teaching is going to lead towards his death, but that death will not have the last word. He will rise from the dead. So it's no wonder that they were struck with silence. If this was easy to comprehend, then they wouldn't have been paying attention close enough. The questions that may have floated through their minds would have been too hard, too deep, too impossible to ask. How do they wrestle with their teacher saying that he's going to die? Do they wonder about how he's going to be betrayed? And what does rising from the dead even mean? Knowledge and experience tells them that when someone dies, they are no longer physically present with them. Which begs an even deeper question. Do they really want to know what this hard truth that Jesus is telling them really means for them? Especially if greatness, the greatness that Jesus teaches about, looks like death on a cross. These are hard and holy questions. One's not answered because they were too hard to ask. Instead, this moment led to the disciples arguing over their own means of being valued and recognized by others and how they would measure that instead. And it led to Jesus getting possibly a little bit more than frustrated with them for not getting it. Which may be why he finds the smallest among them, the child, to serve as the metaphor for what greatness really looks like. Saying, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. And this metaphor is inherently really tricky, because when it comes to greatness, by societal standards, children were at the bottom of the totem pole in Jesus' day. Possibly even today. I mean, they were considered the lowest in society because children require an awful lot of love and care simply to survive. And they take in far more resources than they give back. And children by nature are little people trying to figure out their world. They're complex. They're feisty and clever, quick and fierce, generous and selfish, all at the same time. They're naughty and surprising and downright exhausting. And yet, children also teach us how to honor our imaginations, how to feel deeply and unexplainably. They teach us how to risk those hard and holy questions in search of God and meaning, asking why, how, where, when, 200 times a day. They also show us boldly what trusting in God's abundant love really looks like through their dependence on others. Abundant love is the only thing children know until it's proven otherwise. Through that, children teach us what divine greatness really looks like. Vulnerability, powerlessness, helpless dependence. So all of this is to say that when we see God's greatness as, 26 inches tall with a limited vocabulary, unemployed and with zero net worth, it would have completely changed everything the disciples thought about God. And it might even change us too if we really let it sink in. When we allow ourselves to be moved to a place of welcoming the lowly and being changed by the unexpected. So how do we turn the disciples' silence into our action? How do we find greatness as disciples today? Do we really want to know what following Jesus today really looks like? I hate to break it to you, but I don't have any answers. But a good place to start is asking those risky questions instead of being scared of them. As a relationship with God, instead of perceiving them as a means of doubt instead of faith. Because if Jesus' vision of greatness is so completely opposite of our regular ways of finding and obtaining it, then maybe we should ask those questions we've been avoiding. I mean, if Jesus' death and resurrection seem hard to accept, we should ask those questions. If we wonder how Jesus can be with us or where God is when life really hurts, we should ask those questions. Asking questions is a powerful way of connecting with God about faith and life and everything in between, and we may not always find the answers that we're searching for, but we open that pathway of communication. And as we ask unapologetically as children do, we can find Christ on the roadside along with us. So take a moment, take a deep breath. Let your questions emerge. Let them rise to the surface. You don't have to say them out loud. Maybe ask God the questions that you've refused to ask in the past. And as you wrestle with your questions of faith, I want to invite you to write them down. In each of the pews, if you look in front of you, we have those scribble sheets. They're not just to be used by the littlest among us, so pull them out. Come on, pull them out. There are pencils near them. Please share pencils. There's fewer of those. But take a moment to write down your questions of faith. Engage in this dialogue with God and be open to the possibilities of seeking greatness through neediness, through your questions. And we're going to turn this into a spiritual practice. Spiritual practice tend to have a tangible element with them. After you've written down your questions, I want you to fold them up. You don't have to sign them. They don't have to be the most magical or most thought out question in the world. They just simply have to be something you're wrestling with. And when the offering plate comes around today, I want you to offer your questions to God. We see the offering as a way of giving back to God the gifts we've been given. And one of the gifts we've been given is the ability to ask questions. So you don't have to write your name on it. Just offer it to God. These won't be shared publicly. But take that physical motion of releasing them. To trust that even though you may not find the answer or the answers you're looking for, that God is present with you, engaging with you, reminding you that seeking true greatness comes through the wonder and imagination of one who asks too many questions, of one who trusts that God's abundant love is for you, of one that proves that God can be found in the most unlikely of places, seeking your whole being because you do really want to know. Amen.